thank you all, Indivisible Boca Raton, everyone, for being here tonight. And before I begin my remarks, I would just ask that we all pause for a moment of silence, both for the late departed Coral Springs Vice Mayor Nancy Mateer, as well as recognizing today as Holocaust Remembrance Day. Thank you all. As we've suffered this loss, it is all the more important that we recognize, why we're all here. We love our democracy, we love our country, and we love our neighbors. And that's really what motivated me when it came time for me to decide what I was going to do in this election cycle. I'm not a candidate prior to this election. I never ran for anything before, not even my own student council. But as a first-time candidate and as someone who has a long history in the progressive movement, I felt that it was more important than ever that we had a choice in Florida's 23rd Congressional District, in Boca Raton, and in Broward County after our congressman was unopposed in 2024. And so what is it about my background that qualifies me to run for Congress? I moved to Fort Lauderdale when I was 4 years old. My dad was an Army veteran, and this is where we settled in South Florida. And when I went to college, it was in the midst of the Obama presidency. I had signed up as a volunteer door knocker and phone banker when I went to the DMV to do my motor voter registration to pre-register as a Democrat when I was 16. I saw Barack Obama speaking about universal health care, about nationwide public infrastructure, about really rebuilding the middle class in the midst of the Great Recession. And I said, that's what I am. I'm gonna be a Democrat. And in the midst of going to college and experiencing multiple concurrent healthcare crises within my family, working a federal minimum wage job of $7.25 an hour after playing on the football team, I had one semester left and I said I better get a job. And I was working as a line cook over a hot grill for $7.25 an hour, taking out student loan debt, wondering how am I going to make a living when I get out of school and try to enter into this economy. And at the same time, we had just seen our then governor, Rick Scott, be reelected in 2014. Someone who denied the reality of climate change, who even banned terms like climate change from appearing in official Florida government communications. And I knew that I needed to take more responsibility for myself and for my future, for my family's future, for my friends, for our country's future. And I started to pay attention to the 2016 presidential election. And I looked up a candidate by the name of Bernie Sanders, and I started listening to him talking about Citizens United, talking about a $15 an hour minimum wage, talking about Medicare for all, and talking about the conditions in this country's politics that we would call corruption in any other country. And it's corrupt here too. When I learned about the Koch brothers and about the influence of money in politics and the hundreds of millions, billions of dollars that go into our elections, I was so moved by Bernie Sanders' message that when he was down 50 points in the polls in the summer of 2015, and I was maybe not applying as aggressively to the retail advertising and marketing jobs as I thought maybe I was going to go into that field, but I was reading voraciously every piece of information that I could about the Sanders campaign. And then it hit me that if I care so much about this outcome of this presidential election, and I'm reading everything that I can and wondering when is the campaign going to reach out to me to ask me to volunteer, it occurred to me that I just needed to quit my job and drive to New Hampshire and show up to the one field office for the Sanders campaign. And that's exactly what I did. I quit my job as a line cook and I drove to New Hampshire with no guarantee of any employment. And I started showing up every single day, sleeping in my grandparents' house just across the border in Massachusetts and driving up to Concord. Until eventually they put me on staff as an intern, as a field organizer, and as a regional field director traveling the country to elect Bernie Sanders. And I worked in New Hampshire, in Nevada, in Kansas, in Utah, in New York City, and in Rhode Island. And then I went home and I tried to decide what's next. And I went to the advertising agency that the Sanders campaign used for its fundraising. And I was hired and I was laid off within 2 months. And I thought, boy, Washington, D.C. just chewed me up and spit me back out. What am I gonna do now? And I moved back to Florida, was rehired, and when it came time, when our coworkers and myself were confronted with a PR crisis where the leaders, the partners of our firm were appearing in Huffington Post and BuzzFeed for sexual harassment and workplace discrimination, I was asked to join the organizing committee to help establish a union by my now wife. And I said yes, and I knew she was the one when she asked me to organize our workplace. So we were the first political consulting firm in the country to unionize with the News Guild Communication Workers of America. This was in 2018. At the same time, I was working with clients like the International Brotherhood of Teamsters and Our Revolution, the Sanders organization that was responsible for helping to elect in that very first midterm election cycle 8 years ago. Think of where we were 8 years ago in the first Trump administration, and I was on the front lines of helping to elect Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib, progressives like Ayanna Pressley all across the country, who we now look to as the progressive leaders in the United States Congress. I was doing the click-to-call voicemail recordings whenever you called a hotline to advocate for your member of Congress to co-sponsor Medicare for All. It would be, "Hi, this is Our Revolution. Thank you for calling to ask your member to co-sponsor HR 676, the Medicare for All Act." So that's the kind of work I was doing. I was working with tech, I was working with campaigns, with progressives, with organizations like New Florida Majority that helped pass in 2018 Amendment 4 to restore voting rights to over 1 million Floridians. And this is the kind of work that I've done over the past decade. In the background, as a supporting role player, I've never placed particularly great import on being the one in front of the cameras. For me, it was enough to know that I was helping. I always wanted to have a career where I could help, where I could do something meaningful, impactful to support our community in the South Florida that I love. And when it came time to elect President Biden in 2020, and after working with Our Revolution and living in Washington, D.C., and experiencing the COVID-19 pandemic, and experiencing January 6th living in that city, I was asked to join a firm where I got the opportunity to work with Adam Schiff and with Cory Booker. And so, literally within weeks of the January 6th insurrection, I was working with Adam Schiff's campaign to help craft the response and design the accountability structures with the January 6th committee to hold Donald Trump and all of these insurrectionists that he just pardoned accountable. And that's what I did for the 4 years of the Biden administration. But when it came time for that 2024 election, and when we saw Democrats lose 7 million votes from 2020 to 2024, 81 million votes for Joe Biden in 2020, 74 million for Kamala Harris in 2024. I had moved back to South Florida during the pandemic. I was watching in real time the atrophy and the backsliding, the Democratic backsliding in our state that was within a razor-thin margin of electing Andrew Gillum and Bill Nelson in 2018, a 3-point margin of victory in 2020. That Florida is not so far away, but what I was terribly concerned by was seeing our Democratic member of Congress, Jared Moskowitz, in the very weeks after the 2024 election, blaming progressives for why we lost that election, while he was becoming the very first Democratic member of Congress to join Elon Musk's DOGE caucus. Terribly disappointing. And so it was at that moment that I looked at my wife and I said, we're gonna volunteer for whoever decides to run against Congressman Moskowitz. When he voted for the nonprofit killer bill that would have allowed the Trump administration to designate nonprofit groups it disagrees with as terrorist organizations, that threatened my family's health care through my wife's employment. when we couldn't get a call back about my wife's grandmother to find affordable housing for her senior living on a Social Security check and a small pension. When I saw Congressman Moskowitz as the only Democrat in our state of Florida to vote for the pro-ICE Laken Riley Act that has given ICE the authority to trot on our Constitution and civil rights, I knew that we needed a change. We needed a serious change. It was apparent again on Trump's so-called Liberation Day, last April 7th, when Jared Moskowitz bought the dip during Donald Trump's trade war, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars potentially in stock trades, buying Amazon, buying Lockheed Martin stock as he was advocating for Donald Trump to bomb Iran, personally profiting from his congressional stock trading. It was apparent to me that if I did not step forward, that no one else in our community was going to. And when we've seen in 2022, the rest of the country holding serve and actually mitigating a lot of the Republican gains that we had feared in that election, Florida had nearly a 20-point margin. We saw the bottom completely fall out for the Democratic Party. And in 2024, again, we saw our state that had just been so competitive 4 years prior being completely overridden by the Republicans. And what is the solution? Why did we lose so many votes from 2020 to 2024? It's my generation. It's young people that did not see a reason to come out and vote when we saw Democrats supporting a genocide, when we saw Democrats talking about the stock market when the cost of living has never been more unaffordable for most of us. I knew that I needed to step forward and to provide a voice for the next generation and for what we need to see in this country to not just get back to the status quo that we had prior to Trump, because that status quo is what delivered us Donald Trump. We need to go further, which is why I'm proud to support Medicare for All. We have Jared Moskowitz, who now co-sponsors Medicare for All as a result of our campaign. Nearly 4 years after he was elected, he finally made good on his promise. It just took a primary challenge to hold him accountable. When I talk about a $25 an hour minimum wage, Congressman Moskowitz is not even on Representative Bobby Scott's Raise the Wage Act to $17 an hour. When I talk about a ban on congressional stock trading, we're running a campaign in a district represented by someone who's traded nearly $4 million on the open market. Someone who, just as an example, when he went on Fox News a few weeks ago after the killing of Alex Preddy and Renee Good and said, we don't need to abolish ICE, we need to give them more training and equip them with body cameras. You know who one of his corporate PAC donors was before he said that? A police body camera company that is literally paying $1,000 for him to say, no, we don't need to abolish ICE, we just need to give them body cameras. And one thing that I really fear, and one thing that I'm very cognizant of as someone who's worked across all wings of the Democratic Party, I'm proudly a Democratic socialist. I'm proud to have worked for Bernie Sanders, but I know that beating the fascist Republican Party is the most important objective in this election, which is why I've also worked with Cory Booker and with Adam Schiff and with Democrats in the House and Senate. And we need that unifying appeal here. We cannot just give the progressive wing of the party scraps and expect them to come out and vote for us when young people have never been more disillusioned with both political parties. It would be a tremendous mistake in an election year where Democrats across the country are so mobilized against ICE and against DOGE and against the Republican Party to nominate a Democrat who votes for ICE, who joined DOGE, and who is finding time and time again reasons to work with the Republican Party, so much so that when Ro Khanna and Thomas Massie just put out their bipartisan war powers resolution before Congress, Jared Moskowitz was one of the first Democrats to come out opposed to giving Trump a check, to putting a check on Donald Trump. Jared Moskowitz gave him a blank check to take us to war. So that would be a profound mistake, but what I believe is the way forward, and what is the way forward for South Florida and for the Democratic Party. It is to embrace the universal economic platform of Medicare for All of college for all, of universal child care, of paid family and medical leave, because the question is always, how are you going to pay for that? But when Congress receives a request for $200 billion for war with Iran, there are no questions asked. This is the decision before us, and it is a profound one. And when the question comes, how am I going to run against a Republican? I'm getting some pretty good practice right now, because when Jared Moskowitz was asked on a right-wing podcast, the Patrick Bet-David podcast, about his appointment by our Republican governor, Ron DeSantis, Congressman Moskowitz's response was, I am a twice-appointed Ron DeSantis Democrat, as my socialist opponent likes to point out. And the difference is, I know which side I'm on. I'm always going to be on the side of working people and the working class. And there's never going to be a question of whether my vote is tainted by the corporate PAC dollars I'm receiving, because I'm receiving none of them. The Democratic Party needs a way forward, and when we see two Democratic socialists, Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, with the highest approval rating in the entire Democratic Party, it is because people know and trust and understand the character, the integrity, and the authenticity. I love the United States of America. I was born on the 4th of July. I'm as patriotic as they come, and this is what I believe our country needs: the Rooseveltian vision, the FDR New Deal framework. It's why I support a Green New Deal. It's why I want to build high-speed public transportation all across this country and invest in America so that everyone can afford to get by. So I'm looking forward to taking your questions. Thank you so much for having me again, Indivisible, and have at it.
I'm a voter in your district. I have voted for Jared Moskowitz twice. I know Jared. I was a supporter of Jared. I'm wondering, though, given the fact, again, that you're not accepting money from PACs and not accepting money from big corporations, and you know that he is, and you're in a district where that can really, frankly, make a difference. There are a lot of people who would be interested in that. How is it that those of us who want to support you can do that? How can you effectively? And I want to ask you one other follow-up, which is, even if you get elected, what do you do with the fact that there's somebody in the White House who will take absolute pleasure in vetoing every single thing that a Democrat-controlled House and Senate might put in front of him?
Thank you for those questions. The first answer is that what we're about to report on April 15th, it's the release of the FEC filings for the first quarter of this year. And I'm very proud to say that with over 5,000 individual donors, we're going to report having raised over $325,000 in entirely grassroots money. That is a number that we have tripled in the last quarter alone. And it was primarily because when Congressman Moskowitz came out against Ro Khanna and Thomas Massey's War Powers resolution, that's when I got booked on Don Lemon's show, on Drop Site News. And this actually feeds into the resource question as well. How many here, just by a show of hands, have folks in this room heard of Hasan Piker? It's been in the news quite a bit lately. Our campaign a month ago, I actually flew out to Los Angeles and I joined Hasan on his stream. And in 1.5 hours, we raised $65,000 for our campaign, entirely grassroots. So we know that the money is there. It's the same small dollar fundraising engine that powered Bernie Sanders' presidential campaigns, that has Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez as the very top fundraiser in the House of Representatives with no corporate PAC money. There are people all across the country, as well as here in South Florida, who want to see this kind of progressive leadership and this accountability to the working class and to the American people. So I have a lot of confidence that we'll be able to raise the amount that we need to, and it's going to come by having these partnerships. We just had a town hall last week in Deerfield Beach. We've got more on the way, as well as our door-to-door canvassing, which we're doing in every part of the district, Saturdays, Sundays, as well as making more times available during the week. And we have anytime phone banking. We have structured phone banks running on Tuesdays and Thursdays with our field director, where you'll receive the script, the training, and be able to participate with other volunteers. But there's also anytime phone banks available that if you just have some time to spare, you're not available to go door to door, but you want to help and speak to voters, those opportunities are all available. And we'll be having more events like town halls, house parties, small gatherings, things of that nature. And I think that's something that we're really proud of, is the volunteer operation. In our district, we have a goal of knocking on 80,000 doors, which is more than the number of votes we expect to be cast in our primary. And we've knocked on nearly 10,000 already, as well as making thousands and thousands of phone calls.
I'm a voter in your district. And I was really close to switching from the Democratic Party to being an independent, just because I feel so let down by the Democratic Party. So I think my question to you would be is, besides all this raising money and knocking on doors, what else are we doing to get people really energized about the work that you can do for us? Because I think I feel really let down by Jared Moskowitz. I don't think he's done much for us at all, and even going on these right-wing podcasters is really disappointing for me. So I just want to know, what are we doing to get, especially the younger people, really jazzed and energized? And I hadn't even heard about you until somebody knocked on my door. So to me, that was really kind of exciting to know that you're here.
Yeah. So in addition to our regular volunteering, canvassing, door knocking, phone banking, I'm making myself completely available. I've spoken with former Congresswoman Marie Newman, who's a progressive former member from the Illinois, Chicago area. And one thing that she suggested to me that we're doing right now is having small house parties all across our district, every single zip code. It doesn't matter if it's you, your neighbors, it can be in the driveway, it can be at the kitchen table. It does not need, although I appreciate large audiences like this, it can just be a handful of people. And in a more intimate setting, hearing me, my motivations, understanding your priorities, and that's the kind of grassroots campaigning that we're doing, and I think that's the level of civic empowerment that we need, where there's that connection, because Congressman Moskowitz was our least effective Democrat in Congress. It's based on that nonpartisan Center for Effective Lawmaking from UVA and Vanderbilt. It's objective based on number of roll call votes that he's missed, legislation that has not been introduced, as well as the lack of public town halls. So we're going to be doing a lot more face-to-face meetings. I think one thing with young people, and we've been at Florida Atlantic University several times, I actually know Nick Ostheimer quite well, have joined him for 287G protests. We are registering young people. We're getting them to sign our petitions. We're also making the argument that in Florida, because we have a closed primary system, when young people are overwhelmingly registering as NPA voters, you are disenfranchised. You have to be a Democrat if you want to participate in the August elections. So that's one thing that we're asserting to young people in the district, is this is a reason to join the Democratic Party. This is a reason why I've felt that same level of disaffection. Certainly as a campaign staffer for Bernie Sanders, I was literally in the field office when Debbie Wasserman Schultz locked us out of Vote Builder the day before the New Hampshire primary debate. So I'm very cognizant of the thumb on the scale that has existed in Democratic primaries, but I see that as a reason to positively engage with the party. If we want to change it, then we should participate and try to make it better and more reflective, and that's certainly bringing young people into the fold as well. I would love to. My understanding is that he was supposed to be at a forum like this by Indivisible Boca Raton, and he dropped out. So I would love the opportunity to have a forum, a moderated discussion, a debate, and I'm game anytime, anywhere.
You mentioned the word genocide, and I wondered what your views are on Israel. And the second part is about the property taxes in Florida and some of the things that DeSantis has done. What are your views on that?
Yeah, so on the first part of the question on Israel, I do view Israel's actions in Gaza as a genocide. That is a claim that has been supported by the United Nations. by Amnesty International, by Israeli human rights organizations, including B'Tselem. So what I would assert and what I believe Congress should do is there's a set of domestic laws called the Leahy laws that prevent the United States from providing military funding to foreign security forces of countries that are accused of gross human rights violations. So I believe to follow both U.S. law and the Leahy laws, as well as international law, the United States should immediately restrict military aid to Israel. We also ran a poll in our district of 491 likely Democratic voters, and what we found in that poll is this is a position that's supported by the majority of Democrats here by a 2-to-1 margin. We found in even proportions about 30% and 30% supporting either ceasing military aid or conditioning/reducing military aid relative to the 1/3 that want to either maintain aid at current levels or increase it. And this is a position that is held in our district as well as the majority of Democrats across the country. So I believe in human rights, and for the safety of both Israelis and Palestinians, the United States should not continue to militarily fund Israel's government. They're a very wealthy country and can afford their own defense. That's why That's even why we saw J Street, which is a more liberal Israel-supporting group, come out against U.S. military funding for Israel for those same reasons, for the human rights violations, and also the fact that in the United States, when we are seeing cuts to our affordable housing, to our public transportation with Palm Tran here, when I speak to FAU students and there's not enough affordable housing, and we're sending billions of dollars uncritically to a country that doesn't necessarily need the financial support, that's not a prudent use of our taxpayer dollars, and I believe we should be brought in line with both U.S. and international law. On the second part of your question on property insurance, right now, Republicans in Tallahassee... Property taxes. Well, is your question about the elimination of property taxes in Tallahassee, or?
Yeah, so if we eliminate property taxes like DeSantis is saying, who's going to pay for roads and infrastructure support and schools and things like that?
Yeah.
What would you do to stand up for infrastructure rebuilding in the state of Florida?
Yeah, so, and the reason I repeated back the property insurance rather than property taxes is because I believe that Republicans are trying a hidden ball trick right now, where they're talking about property taxes because they don't want to confront the crisis of property insurance in this state. Our property taxes, they fund our EMTs, our health clinics, our schools, our roads, our police department, the things that we rely on just to maintain normal everyday functions in our municipalities. The reason that they're doing that is because they don't want to address the property insurance crisis, which I believe in Congress there is a national priority. Here in Florida, we suffer from flooding, from hurricane force winds, but in other parts of the country out west, it is wildfires, it is extreme drought, which we're also incidentally experiencing here. So there are municipalities across the country that are really struggling to get insurance, and we've seen with Citizens Insurance in Florida not necessarily meeting the scale of the need, and with private insurers having liquidity problems, especially after some of these storms that have occurred on the Gulf Coast. We've been very fortunate on the Atlantic coast not to suffer the same kinds of storms that Hurricane Ian, Hurricane Michael, and others have devastated the West Coast with. So I believe in a federal property insurance process. It's very similar to the Medicare for All concept, where when you're talking about insurance and risk pools, the broadest possible risk pool, if we have everyone in, it defrays the cost so that people are paying the lowest relative to provide that insurance for people. So I believe that there's federal property insurance reform that can be made, and with infrastructure, and to support what our local property taxes go towards. That's why I support initiatives like the Green New Deal. I believe that just in South Florida alone, we have billions and billions and billions of dollars of infrastructure needs. In the southern part of our district, in the city of Fort Lauderdale, where I'm from, something that I followed for many, many years, for the better part of a decade, is the water and sewage line breaks in the city of Fort Lauderdale, where we see hundreds of millions of gallons of raw sewage leaking out into the intracoastal. It is a regular occurrence to have boil water notices, and just a price tag of $1.2 $1.6 billion for the city of Fort Lauderdale, for instance. That's a cost that, absent government bonds and financial gymnastics, it's just such an enormous cost for a municipality to bear. And so if we have a federal investment made in improving, raising our roads like they've done down in Miami Beach to mitigate against flooding and even sunny day flooding, if we have investments in public transportation, like the way that DeSantis is trying to cut Tri-Rail by $27 million, I believe we need to invest more in Tri-Rail when we had record ridership in 2025. So it would be about weatherization, about climatization, and protecting our coastal estuaries, reinforcing mangroves and seawalls to prevent, and coral reefs as well. We have one of the only tracts of coral reefs in the entire country right here in South Florida. So it's about not just transitioning our fossil fuel economy towards clean, renewable energy. It's also about the environmental restoration that we're going to need to do to restore the seagrass beds, the mangroves, the coral reefs, the things that make South Florida such an attractive place for people to come, travel, vacation, and spend their tourism dollars. That's what we rely on, absent the income tax, to fund a lot of our state's needs. So those are some of the things I would do to support what we need with property taxes.
The majority of the room, I noticed, did not raise their hand when you had asked if anyone knew who Hasan Piker was. In that interview, he asked you what you would do with a 10% reduction of the military budget, about $150 billion. And your answer was regarding free education. So I wanted to ask you again an opportunity to expound on that. Would you alter that at all? Or if not, basically give the rest of the room an opportunity to hear what your answer was.
Yeah, absolutely. So the question was on the military budget and a reduction. Because, to put it in context, the United States currently has over $1 trillion in our annual Pentagon budget. It's the highest it's ever been. The year after Joe Biden rightly withdrew the United States from Afghanistan after a catastrophic 20-year war, the military budget still went up the following year. How does that happen when we are leaving a war halfway around the world? And it's because there's incredible waste, fraud, and abuse within the defense industry. When I mentioned Congressman Moskowitz investing in Lockheed Martin stock, that is a stock price that hit an all-time high on the market the Monday after the strikes on Iran. So there are a few ways that I would go about reducing the military budget without affecting in any way, shape, or form military pay or benefits, which I actually believe should be increased. We had military members and their families at food banks lining up during the last government shutdown. We have a completely inadequate investment in the people that make up the United States military and the housing and the benefits that they're insured. But where I do see room to really reduce the military budget, number one, nuclearization. And we see the level of brinkmanship with Donald Trump right now, where he's threatening to wipe out an entire civilization in Iran. It is completely unconscionable. And there is no legitimate use, there is no legitimate scenario in which the United States will ever use our entire nuclear arsenal. And we need to refurbish and maintain and spend billions and billions of dollars just to maintain our nuclear weapons. I would rather see us phase out nuclear weapons without impacting military readiness or national security. I believe that having tens of thousands or thousands of nuclear warheads is just a cost that is too enormous for the United States to bear when we're talking about cumulatively hundreds of billions of dollars over the course of a decade. So I'd like to see a real reduction in our nuclear arsenal. I also believe that there is strong cause for the United States to phase out some of our overseas military installations where we have allies in the region that can reasonably support their own military. So I believe that there's a significant amount of drawback that we can do with the military budget. And also, the Pentagon's never passed an audit in its entire history. I would like to see the Pentagon pass an audit before we go and send more of our taxpayer dollars to the
As the videographer for the group, I have to edit a lot of speeches and a lot of statements. And one that I had to do recently was a young 18-year-old young woman whose mother was taken away by ICE. Police officers took her uncle and her mother, leaving her to take care of her multiple siblings. So it's one of the things, honestly, that sticks with me. That's one of the most difficult things to have to keep watching. And I certainly wish that we didn't have to protest it so much. So my question is, as a congressman, what can you do about 287G? I realize it's a state level thing, but what can you do, and how would your leadership differ from Jared Moskowitz on that issue?
Just to frame the terms of the conversation, because when Nick, the president of the FAU College Dems, was describing the 287G agreement that Florida Atlantic University had entered into with ICE, that was actually a product of when our congressman, Jared Moskowitz, wrote the personal letter of recommendation for FAU's president, Adam Hasner, who's a former House Majority Leader, a Republican in Tallahassee, and then went on to be an executive vice president at the GEO Group. Jared Moskowitz, our Democratic representative, recommended for a private prison executive to be leader of a public university. In what universe is that moral? Much less make any academic sense, someone who had no prior experience in higher education instruction. So when it comes to what Congress can do, and I've reflected on this a great deal, my wife is the proud daughter of Nicaraguan immigrants who fled to the United States during the Contra War, came here undocumented, got amnesty under Ronald Reagan. That's the kind of reform that we need today, where not on a partisan basis, but just on a human basis, the United States should uphold our values and welcome people in, whether it is by passing a pathway to citizenship for dreamers, for those on temporary protected status, and protecting temporary protected status from DHS, which is trying to rip it away. I've been at the Fort Lauderdale airport rallying with SEIU and Unite Here for extension of Haitian TPS. Debbie Wasserman Schultz was there. Sheila Terflis McCormick was there. Jared Moskowitz was not there, but I was standing in for our 23rd district. I've been at the Broward Transitional Center in Pompano Beach, for those of you that are not aware. The Broward Transitional Center is a private GEO Group operated ICE facility within the 23rd District on Powerline Road in Pompano Beach. It's the site where one of the deaths in ICE custody, one of at least 45 deaths, have occurred. The death of Andre Blaise, a 45-year-old Haitian woman who was taken during a flight from the U.S. Virgin Islands to Charlotte and passed away in that facility. I've joined the vigils there on a bi-weekly basis on several occasions with Joyful Resistance and Residual Manners and many of the partner organizations to Indivisible Boca Raton. And what I believe Congress can do, and this is something that I actually approve of Debbie Wasserman Schultz, she conducted an unexpected wellness check at Alligator Alcatraz just a few days ago. And that is the level of oversight that, particularly when Donald Trump has really defenestrated the Department of Justice, as he has with so many other government agencies, and he's removed the civil rights ombudspersons that would receive these civil rights complaints within DOJ. It is incumbent upon members of Congress to perform welfare checks on their constituents, and those constituents include citizens and non-citizens alike. And so one thing that I would do is show up unannounced at the Broward Transitional Center, at the Miramar ICE Enforcement and Removal Operations Facility, where I've also been and joined with American Friends Service Committee and Mi Gente and other Florida Immigrant Coalition, immigrant justice organizations that are doing amazing, tremendous work in our state, as well as going down to the Everglades Detention Center, which I did on the very first day that I launched this campaign. So I would pursue vigorously accountability by showing up, having a presence locally within the district, and performing these wellness checks in conjunction with allied organizations, with faith leaders, with community leaders, with a compelling interest to perform wellness checks on the people in our district. But I would also pursue a policy in Congress of pursuing amnesty for our immigrant neighbors, passing a pathway to citizenship for dreamers, for deferred actions of the parents of arrivals, which was also part of Obama's program. When he passed DACA, he also passed DAPA. The court struck it down, but I believe if you came to the United States with your children, your family should not be separated when there is a reasonable pathway to integrate you into American society. And I would absolutely, as part of this, as part of the affirmative case for immigration reform and providing this pathway to citizenship and permanent residency, I would also very vigorously pursue abolishment of the private prison industry, which should not exist. Locking up human beings for profit should not exist in this country.
It's no secret that both statewide and nationally we have an affordability crisis. Same thing with a housing crisis. But I think one thing that's pretty quiet or not spoken about is the amount of ghost jobs, whether it's hosted on platforms from private companies like Indeed or LinkedIn. How would you tackle the K-shaped economy with all these ghost jobs that are existing? And would you be open to a federal job board where one doesn't necessarily need to enroll into the military, but the federal government would be open to exploring job opportunities for the public?
Yeah, absolutely. I believe in a federal jobs guarantee. There's more than enough work to be done when we talk about building out the public infrastructure for a national healthcare system, when we talk about a Green New Deal and the infrastructure needs that we have in our community and across the country. I would seriously pursue a national federal jobs guarantee that pays the prevailing wage. So I support a $25 minimum wage. I would like to see every U.S. federal job with a $25 wage and a union. And I believe what you're speaking about with the ghost jobs, what I would also really look into is the NLRB and reforming the National Labor Relations Board. Donald Trump has really done a number on that, as he has with a lot of the DOGE initiatives. So I would want an NLRB that is able to validate private market job postings that are going up, that these jobs are not ghost jobs, but that they are real and provide a material benefit both to the employer and to the person they're employing. I think this also feeds into, especially with job postings online, just the AI economy. I think for a long time, we've considered AI to be something that's going to automate the factory jobs or the fast food jobs, but now we see it coming for the white-collar professional jobs, for the creative industry. We saw the Writers Guild in Hollywood go on strike a few years ago because Warner Brothers and the major media production firms are trying to literally automate script writing and acting on camera. So this AI economy is coming for everybody. And in the face of that, I believe we need public ownership of large segments of big tech. I would like to see AI brought under democratic control under the federal government, so that when we're pursuing investments in artificial intelligence, it's not to raise our utility rates by billions of dollars so that we can see more animated videos of Snoopy or whatever, but that we can actually use this technology to a democratic and shared end.
We want Medicaid for everybody, and we have a deficit of $39 trillion. We pay $1 trillion a year in interest. How are you going to pay for all these projects? And number two, AI is a very dangerous thing. It's going to be thinking for itself, and eventually they're going to bomb. We're going to have atomic bombs. They're going to direct atomic bombs. What are you going to do about that?
Yeah, when it comes to Medicare for all, the way we're going to pay for it is by taxing the billionaires and the corporations. You're free to disagree, but the United States has the highest health. The United States pays twice as much per capita for our health care as any other country, and we're the wealthiest nation on earth not to guarantee health care as a right. So that's why I support Medicare for all. And the fact is, we already pay you and I and everyone who's had a job in this country, we pay a Medicare tax already. So it's already coming out of our paycheck. But what we're asking is for that payroll tax to be enough to actually cover your vision, your hearing, your dental, your mental health care, your reproductive health care, without having a premium, a deductible, a copay, or an out-of-pocket cost. Because it is incredibly expensive, and it's the reason why we have 27 million people in this country who are uninsured. We have many, many millions more who are not fulfilling their prescriptions because it costs too much. So,
Yes, we can.
we can afford it.
Yes, we can.